Great. So thank you all so much for having me. My name is Matt Kline. Many of you might know me, but I am currently the conductor of the UCSD Chamber Orchestra, although that will be officially up in about 10 to 12 days. And but currently I am a professor at Southwestern College, which is a wonderful college down in Chula Vista. And I also conduct the orchestra there and teach. I'm the leader of the string program. I want to thank you all so much for having me here. I know many of you from my time at UCSD, and just thank you so much for Victoria for inviting me to give this presentation. It's really just wonderful to be here with you, and I'm so glad that you're doing these meetings and really creating this sense of community during this time. I just can't tell you how important this is, just to be constantly just making sure you're engaged with other people, whether it's the orchestra or any other kind of event. These things are just so vital. And so I'm looking forward to talking with you tonight. So I'll give a little bit of information about what I will be talking about this evening. When Victoria reached out to me about 2 or 3 weeks ago to give a presentation, she asked if I could basically talk about anything. And so when she said that, I thought to myself, I have no idea what that means. If anything, my first choice would be to talk about whether James Harden is going to be traded from the Rockets, but I figured, maybe I should keep it a little bit more music centered. And so I remember, I literally, those challenges people do on Facebook where they say, find the nearest book near you and turn to page 162 and just posted it. And so I think I basically did that. I looked around and I pulled up the first score that was right in front of me, and I said, you know what? I think I should talk about Anton Bruckner's Symphony No. 4. It has been sitting here on my desk. I have been thinking about it a lot. It's just, I have these thoughts swirling around in my brain, and so that's what I'm going to do. And so Bruckner is a composer that I kind of just have a fascination with, and it almost feels like a guilty indulgence for me sometimes with my main work and all the other things. For whatever reason, I just keep coming back to Bruckner's music. So let me just share my screen real quick with you. And I'm just going to actually, give me 2 seconds. I'm going to do this because we're going to be listening to some music. There we go. Okay, great. So if we look here, enter full screen. I've titled this Between Appearance and Disappearance, and this kind of abstract title will slowly, I think, hopefully reveal itself over time. But when I was constructing it, I wanted to have not so much just be like, here is Bruckner's Symphony 4. This is what happens in Bruckner's Symphony 4. Yay, Bruckner's Symphony No. 4. I wanted to have a kind of dialogue with it and kind of have an experiment with it where just to see if I could draw some relationships out of it with other music. And so I've put together a kind of playlist where I'm going to be going back and forth between the piece. And we're not going to listen to the whole piece. It's, over 80 minutes long, and that would take all evening. So I'm just going to be playing excerpts from this piece, as well as other compositions to just show some musical ideas that I find in Bruckner's music, but also how it can translate into other pieces, and just other ideas that come from pieces, and hopefully something will emerge, and this is kind of an experiment for me, just seeing what I can create by putting these pieces together. It's kind of the joy of programming. In a way, this is something that, since I can't be doing live concerts right now, this is almost an excuse to kind of work that part of my brain where what happens when you put this piece next to other? Oh, and what's the implications if you put this? It's actually a lot of fun when you do it. And so the other part, I kind of I based it off a series of chapters from this book by Eva-Maria Houben, Musical Practice as a Form of Life, where she goes through solos, duos, trios, quartets. And so I just abstractly, that's how I use the pieces. These kind of interludes. There's going to be a solo, there's going to be a trio, and then there's going to be a quartet. And that's kind of how I've evolved these. And we will be going through pieces, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you. Okay, so great. Let's just keep going. I have a lot of stuff, so if I'm talking, I apologize. I want to make sure I don't keep us here all night. So we're going to be talking about the Austrian composer Anton Bruckner. This is a very fascinating composer. He's considered kind of during what we would call the late Romantic stage in the 19th century. In a lot of ways, you could see him as a composer that comes after the music of Richard Wagner, and a little bit before the music of Gustav Mahler. They were kind of contemporaries, and we know that Mahler really admired the music of Bruckner. And although he was seen as kind of this like extreme, you know, he was not admired by the people that were really in the Brahms camp at the time. And Bruckner, you know, he really expanded the symphony just as far as scope, as far as length. All his symphonies are very long. I think the shortest one would be the Sixth Symphony, which is about 1 hour long. And then the rest of them, they're just these massive, sprawling compositions. He wrote, technically, he wrote 9 symphonies, but really he wrote 10 because there's a symphony number 0. He was part of a group of composers that was afraid that if he wrote the 10th symphony, it would go beyond Beethoven's Symphony number 9, and you just couldn't do that. And so they called that the curse of the 9th. Great. So his Symphony number 4 was composed in 1874, but it wasn't premiered until about 1881. And it actually went through many, many, many revisions. And this is a problem of Bruckner's music, is that you actually have lots of different versions in it. So we're just going to dive right into the score to see what we're looking at, okay? Right from the beginning, we see in the strings that we have this pianissimo tremolo. And this tremolo goes for a very, 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 very long time. And even from the beginning, you just have 2 bars where all you have is this completely static pianissimo tremolo. And if you look at it, you know, it's very quiet. This is an E flat major chord that's voiced fairly close together. You know, it's not even an octave. It's really just this the span of a fifth right here. And what that does to me is that if you hear this live or even in a recording, the sound source is a little bit ambiguous. It is just the tremolo itself kind of diffuses the sound, and it's this very, 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 very quiet sound that seems to be coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. You know, it's just this vibration that kind of emerges. And then this, to me, this tremolo, he begins a lot of his symphonies with tremolo. This kind of texture, even when he doesn't, it really starts with it. All the symphonies in some way starts with this immediate texture, and then something else comes in. But particularly Symphony number 4, 7, 8, and 9 all begin with a distinct tremolo. Although you can make the arguments that the other ones have some kind of variation of that, which really is partially a reference to Beethoven's Symphony number 9. That is how Beethoven's Symphony number 9 kind of begins. And then the D minor chord comes in. And for me, this is a kind of threshold that begins right here. There's a musicologist named Peter Gulk, who I love the way he describes this opening. He says it's a beginning before beginning. It's, you know, it's a music that it starts, but it's on its way to becoming music. It really hasn't quite become that yet. It is pointing towards something else, like something is about to happen. And so it's just this static texture. And to me, this is a threshold between complete silence, something else happening. It is just this in between. And that's why, again, it is in this state of appearing, but nothing has happened yet. And I find that a very interesting implication. It's almost, you can really touch silence in a certain way because it's emerging out of it, but it's also disappearing at the same time. So again, I think of this as a threshold. This is something has not quite begun yet. And this implications are going to, they're going to be very, very profound implications throughout the entire symphony. And then the first thing that comes in is this French horn. It's this solo French, and even though it says, Hertrovens, which is prominent, it really sounds like it's coming from the distance, like in the Austrian Alps. It's something that is far, 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 far away. And, you just have this really basic interval that begins it. And then you have this space here where it just disappears again into this texture. A lot of people call Bruckner's symphonies a landscape. It is this wide open landscape. And again, that the sound itself is just carrying everywhere, and it's this big open space. And then what else do I have? So you see that it's coming from this distance, and it keeps disappearing into these bars of silence. Every time it has a phrase, there's always this bar of silence. And you can think of this as the note itself resonating into nothingness. And then it emerges again. But right here, I want you to pay attention to this note. This is a C flat, transposed in the horn, but it's a C flat right here, which, if you think about this, this is just this perfect that keeps going back to E flat major, T, do, do, D, and then it goes up a half step, T, do, do, D. This note, to me, is the core of the entire symphony. It seems so simple, it just kind of hangs there, but it is really going to define everything we're about to hear. Because when you think about it, a C flat in the context of E flat major, what he's outlining is he's pointing towards a minor 4 chord. So it'd be an A flat minor chord. But you still have this E flat fifth underneath. And so the A flat chord is kind of ambiguous. It's kind of mixed in there. It just is a shadow of this chord. It's like, you hear this something in the distance that's not quite there, but it implies the A flat minor, but then again, it just disappears right into this nothingness that is this kind of simmering E flat major. And then it goes back to the E flat major. And then right here, when you have this third iteration, this is so beautiful. The tremolo itself, which has been static, it's been nothing, suddenly it starts to shift. It starts to the ground itself starts to shake, and you hear this descending line that as it appears, it's also disappearing because it starts to appear and then it just starts to fade away as it keeps going down, 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 down. And you hear this emerge, this, and then it disappears like this, okay? And then what's nice is the woodwinds come in, and right as the woodwinds come in, the lower strings just disappear. And suddenly you're in this new ethereal texture, even though all it is the basses have just disappeared. And then I'll quickly go through this. You have, suddenly in the space, you have an echo from the horn going back and forth from the horn. You go through these new harmonic progressions. That's really beautiful. The one thing I want you to pay attention is this rhythm is dun, 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 dun. Ta, dee, 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 dee. It's this 2 quarter notes and a quarter note triplet. Dun, 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 dun. This is going to be a big theme throughout the piece, and it's going to grow, grow, grow. Finally, we get into the main theme. It unfolds itself, okay? Then we're going to listen to the first couple minutes. We're going to land on this horn where it seems to just freeze. The music just kind of stops. It's in this in-between zone where, is this music or is it not? It's just this one note, which to me, if any of you know Schubert's 8th Symphony, this is exactly how he transitions from the opening to the second theme, is he uses a French horn to just stand still and then it goes into dee do dee 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 dee, and Bruckner goes into the most Schubertian theme I can imagine. Yum pum pum, pim pim pum pum. This is so classical, and it is almost like all I can hear is Schubert. Okay, so I've talked a lot. Let's listen to this. This is a wonderful recording with the Berlin Philharmonic with Simon Rattle. And I recommend, if you can, having headphones, because there is some really, really, really quiet material like this opening. It's a really special sound, okay? So let's listen to this. This is the opening of Bruckner's Fourth Symphony. Here we go. Okay, I'm gonna move on, but you can hear this just really beautiful opening. Um, Great. So, moving on to Eva-Maria Houben. Many of you might know Eva-Maria Houben is a composer who uh, is a very, very, very important artist to me, someone who I've been working with quite a bit in the last few years, and I'm currently writing my dissertation on her. So obviously, she's just someone who's uh, on my mind in her artistry a lot. And she's a composer that lives in Germany. She is part of a international group called Vondelweiser, but she's also a wonderful organist and musicologist and someone who's just fascinated with music history. And you really experience this in her compositions, which is wonderful. So before I begin, every time I do one of these interludes, I'm just going to read just a very, very short passage from her in her book. So this is the solo, but I'm just going to read what she says about the solo. I love this passage. She says, "Solo. I am alone as a performer. This is a challenge. There is no other performer unless the audience is involved in any way. When comparing different solo compositions, a great variety occurs. During the performance, a performer can follow a trail. The piece leads them. They can dwell at a certain place of the composition. They might wander through different landscapes, or they can find themselves suddenly at another place. The solo performer can stay closed in themselves, but also can also open their being to the experienced situation, can address an audience as an individual, or perform for themselves, in which case an audience could be present during the performance without being addressed. The solo situation can be accompanied by a lack of communication, but can also open a wide space for a counterpart." Okay. Um, so um, this piece, this is her Sonatina number 3 for organ, and I'm choosing the second movement, which is a really beautiful composition. Um, and so if we look at the score, which is one page for the second movement, you'll see I specifically picked this because this note begins in almost a similar way as the Bruckner. You have this one single drone that you begin the piece, and it's as if, you know, the piece is becoming, but it's also coming from, it's this very, 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 very quiet note. And I love the organ so much. It is the most unbelievable instrument by the simple fact that you can start a note and it can go on forever. It just, you hold it and it will never end until you release it. To me, that is the greatest thing in the world. And so you have this low note that you just begin and it creates this foundation. And again, it's pointing towards something else. And eventually these chords come in. Um, and I love this. Houben has a phrase called listening to yourself. And so when you do this, you yourself create this low note, probably with your foot, and then you experience holding all of these different chords against this one note. And so you can listen to yourself change these notes and hear how they experience changing, they relate to themselves and to this single note. And so it's this kind of meditation that the performer goes through and they experience listening to themselves. And she even has this phrase right here when she says, with the chords, play the chords molto legato and very, very softly, like a hymn very far away. So it's something that's appearing and you just play them and eventually they just disappear. And you have these moments where you can dwell for a while. You can have this fermata where you just sit there and then eventually you move on into a fermata that's in silence, and then you move through it. And then she has these passages where you can repeat for as long as you want, but then eventually move on. Okay, so let's listen to this recording with Carson Kuhlman playing. This is her Sonatina number 3, the second movement. Okay, here we go. Fantastic. Okay, so that was Eva-Maria Houben's Sonatina. So now going back to the Fourth Symphony, I wanted to just look at one more passage from the first movement that is a really wonderful moment, which, sorry, microphone. Going back to the first movement, this is a really fantastic moment because it's so important to understand that Anton Bruckner, his instrument was the organ. That is what he spent his entire life working on and playing. And so a lot of his symphonies are shaped by the sound of the organ. And it's not just the sound. I also feel like in a lot of ways, the idea of where you hold a note, you release the air and the sounds into the hall. It's letting loose the sound that the performer starts it, but it has this life of its own that is kind of released. And it's a really, there's so many implications about that, about how he treats harmony and how he treats the lines and the counterpoint. It's not so much just this like individual, but he's following a path and allowing it to come out of these initial impulses. And so here we'll hear what happens is it fades away into this opening texture and these lines come back. But what happens is this viola line emerges. And as the viola line plays, this chorale starts, similar to the sound of the organ that we just played in the Houben. And to me, when you listen to this, all I can think about is this sounds exactly like an organ. There's no organ playing in this recording, but he constructs this sound where the brass and the strings create this incredible instrument where the sound is just released. So let's listen to this moment in the Bruckner. It's a really beautiful moment. Let me see, where is it? 9:38. Okay, give me 2 seconds. All right, here we go. There we go. All right, here we go. Great, beautiful. And you'll notice that all that material is really constructed from that opening tremolo and the dee do do dee. It's that one motive that was that began the opening of the piece. Okay. Believe me, that will return. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at, let me just, is a duo, okay? Let me just read a passage real quick that I really like. This is a really wonderful thing. So she writes about the duo. How does art encounter love? What do love and art have in common? The subject of love is separation, according to Anton Bruckner. Love transforms one individual into two human beings by separating the one individual forever from the loved one. Being just two means being together and being separated at the same time. Transfer to musical practice, this idea can offer a special view on the duo. Duality can arise during the performance of a duo. In a duo, both performers ask, "Where are you?" And both answer, "I am here." With this answer, both feel we are not one. We are together in the duality. We are together because we are not at the same place. Okay, great. So the composer we're going to look at for the duo is a wonderful composer named Elliot Carter. This is honestly a composer I was weirdly fascinated by at the age of 16, which I'll be honest is very weird for a 16-year-old. Looking back on it, that was very bizarre that this is the composer I chose to obsess over. But I really liked his music a lot. He's an American composer that kind of fits into something called modernism or even high modernism. He lived to be about 103 or 104 years old and continued writing up right until the end. Extremely prolific composer and really interesting artist. He studied with two very different teachers. He studied early on with the composer Charles Ives, but then later went to Paris to study with Nadia Boulanger, who taught many composers such as Stravinsky and Copland. Actually, no, not Stravinsky, but I think she taught Stravinsky, the music of Stravinsky, but Copland studied with her for sure. And so we are going to be looking at Elliot Carter's Sonata for Cello and Piano. This is considered one of Carter's very early works. It was still before the first string quartet, and especially the second, which won him the Pulitzer, and that descended into it like the style that everyone really knows. But there's still a lot of Carter-esque material in here. And so in here, this is a fascinating piece where you have immediately from the beginning, you have two different characters. There are two very, very distinct types of music. And this manifests itself in many different ways. One, you obviously have two instruments, and both of them are defined by this musical material. The piano has this very clear, rigid, kind of austere sound where it's di yo ya da da di yong ga da ding dong da ding dong da. It's like a clock. It just keeps ticking. It has these very consistent quarter notes that keep going over and over and over and over again. And then the cello emerges with this broad lyrical line. It says even espressivo quasi rubato, and it's lyrical, and it is very different than this kind of rigid clockwork like material. And so, one, you have two individuals, the musicians, expressing these two types of characteristics. And Elliot Carter himself even said this is the two worlds of one, this is the world of Igor Stravinsky, the very precise, very, very literal kind of music right here. And then this is the music of Arnold Schoenberg, this kind of, free, lyrical kind of Viennese sound that comes in. And it's very interesting, he synthesizes them by not even trying to synthesize them. He literally just puts them on top of each other. He doesn't try to make one or the other, which is very Charles Ives. This is exactly what Charles Ives would do, where he has these two musics that just are layered on top of each other. And it's actually really brilliant what he does. And so within this, again, you're going to hear these two characters and how they interact and create one music, but at the same time, their identities are completely retained as individuals. Okay, so let's listen to the sonata. I have a video, if I can get it. Hold on. Oh, I exited out of it. Give me 2 seconds. Elliot, I apologize for this. I thought I had it right there. There we go. All right, here we go. Sorry about this. All right, here we go. Great. So that was Elliot Carter's sonata for cello and piano. Great. So moving on. What's going on here? Give me 2 seconds. Sorry. Oh, I know why. That's why. Great. So going on to the second movement of Bruckner's Symphony 4. This is a really beautiful movement. All of Bruckner's slow movements are just these stunning creations. I recommend listening to the second movement of the seventh, eighth, or the third movement of the ninth. Actually, sorry, the third movements of the eighth or ninth of the slow movements, and they're just really unbelievable compositions. And so right from the beginning, we have two kind of slightly different types of material here. And I love how this begins. It begins on beat 2 as if it's just kind of emerging from nothing. The silence itself has just this kind of presence that is almost palpable here. And it's this material that is almost just kind of a fragment of something. It just keeps disappearing. You see all of this space in here. Even here, it's just pum, 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 pim, pum, 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 don, ti, don. And then emerging is this long cello line. And you'll see it begins with the interval that began the symphony. Ti, do. So ti, do, di, do, 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 di, di. And it continues the symphony as it began. And you'll see it goes on. But what I like about this, the way I feel like it's not that the cello line is kind of filling in what's here. They're still totally different materials, and it seems like they both are walking through a giant, like I almost think of like catacombs, like you're in this giant space, and this is just it's just the light that's illuminating how much space is actually there. And it's really beautiful to hear just these two types of material kind of interact on top of each other. And then eventually the theme kind of just disappears into nothing, and it just goes down to pizzicato. And this horn that, again, from the beginning was far away, just has this very tiny call in the back, pum, pa, pum, pim, pee, pee. And then it comes back, and it keeps doing that where the theme emerges and then it just disappears into nothing. Okay, so let's listen to the second movement of Bruckner's Symphony Number 4. This is a really beautiful movement. Listen to a little bit of it. Great. it's funny listening to that. I remember years ago I worked with the principal of the Hamburg Symphony, and somehow the conversation of Bruckner came up, and he was just like, "Oh, I hate Bruckner. He just starts all these melodies, and then they just stop." And then and I remember like right when he said that, I was like, "That's why I love his music." Like it was this weird moment of like, yes, like that's exactly why it's so good. Like anyway, it was that was a really funny thing that he said to me. And sometimes I hear that in this music. Great. So moving on, going to the trio section. Let me just read this quote real quick about a trio. This is very interesting. I love thinking about this one. Being in a trio, the separation no longer comes into the foreground as it does in a duo. The commonality begins. 3 participants share a room. It takes 3 to deliver a narration. A third party is added, and the relationship between the two is disturbed. Something can happen. While the separation is the focus subject of the duo, the trio addresses instability. The trio is a vulnerable body. Collisions, frictions, but also compensation and protection against danger become important in the trio. The 3 actors of a trio are radically dependent on each other. Okay. Great. So I chose Schoenberg's Trio for Strings, his Opus 45. Schoenberg is probably maybe a composer you've heard, and he kind of in a lot of ways in the 20th century was the boogeyman of music. You know, a lot of people just ended up hating his name because, you know, he was the one who ventured into atonality and completely left the stability of tonality. And then in this music, you hear 12-tone music where he takes the music and orders all the 12 pitches in a very particular way to create the structure of the piece. And so we're going to listen to the opening. And I love when we look at this, you see from the beginning that there's already this kind of instability. This whole piece is, for me, it's the 3 individuals trying to find a way to come together, you know, what, as Houben said, to find some kind of stability and protection. But from the beginning, you know, the 2 violins are in this kind of unstable tremolo, you know, quasi trill, and the cello has this erratic line. As you can see, it's very ornamented in detail. You know, and then the viola comes in with something similar, but it's not quite the same. And the only thing that holds them together is the fact that they all have to play with some kind of pulse. Even if that pulse is not completely obvious to the audience, you're still playing within some kind of grid. And so it goes through all these episodes where, you know, I was thinking about this, how they try to imitate each other, but can never seem to find common ground. They're always trying to reference each other's material, like even here, but it never seems to quite lock in. And this is a little bit similar what he's doing with the harmony. I won't go too much into that, but there is like the harmony is trying to find itself back to this kind of this ordering. And so you see the tempos are constantly changing, and it goes through all these episodes, and it goes along. And then finally, the music starts to slowly coalesce. And what happens is, where is the measures? It keeps going. You land on this bar. Oh my gosh, this bar to me it's almost shocking how simple it is. It is so complex and chaotic before that. When you finally land on this bar, it's just da 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 da, and everyone's together in unison. Da 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 da. Ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong, and it's there's almost this kind of shock as the group has finally come together, and then it like stops and it disappears into nothing. The material is very sparse, it's fragmented, it keeps disappearing. It's as if it just is abandoned itself, and then it will go on to these other episodes. So let's listen to Schoenberg's trio. I also forgot to pull this up, my bad. I don't know why I didn't have that. Schoenberg Trio, Opus 45. Here we go. But I know there's a score version of it with a good recording. So here we go. Okay, here we go. So listen to it. This is a really wonderful piece by Arnold Schoenberg. That was part one of the trio. It's a much longer piece. Great. So moving on to the third movement. I'm not going to say too much. I want to make sure we have enough time. So the third movement, the only thing I'm going to say is it begins like the opening. It's the same. It kind of comes back to this, this tremolo where it's starting, and it brings back that. Remember that rhythm I said, dun dee 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 dee, dun 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 dun. But now it's double time, dun dun da 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 da. Dun, dun, da, 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 da. It's just the same rhythm, but now he turns it into the scherzo. And the voices keep coming in and coming in. So let's listen to the third movement. I just want us to briefly listen to it because it's so wonderful. Here we go. Good. Great. I just want to make sure we move on. So then we get to the finale. Oh, the finale. This is where we're all leading up to. Bruckner finales tend to be epic. I mean, really epic. They're just these enormous things because it's kind of the weight of the symphony that, he's built it all up and then it resolves itself in this really large way. Okay. So in the beginning of it, what I really like is that, it starts with these two these two measures with just one thing happening like at the beginning, except this time instead of a tremolo, it's a pulse. It is this single boom, boom, boom coming from deep within, just the cellos and the basses. This very, very quiet boom, 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 and it's going to continue itself for a long time up until the big climax. That's the pulse just continues over and over. And what I like about it is it's the opening, but somehow it has clarified itself slightly more, where before it was diffused, but now it suddenly has a more singular source. And that's what this kind of march rhythm does. It clarifies itself. And so we've come all this way, and it's similar, but now it has a more specific connection to it. Then, to me, this whole opening is like the symphony is in in a snow globe or something, and it's all coming together at this one point. And Beethoven does something similar in Beethoven Symphony Number 9, where he introduces all the themes, and then eventually he moves past it into the Ode to Joy, in the finale. And so here you can see you have these rhythm, like again, the opening of the symphony is dee, do, do, dee. It's these three measures. Well, here he goes dee, yo. I mean, he has these three. Sorry, dee, do. Anyway, sorry, I'm not saying correctly. It's these octaves, and it's these three notes that descend. And so this kind of has a callback to the opening, but it's in a different context. And you have the tremolos that emerge, and it keeps going, it keeps repeating, and then eventually it gets a little faster. And eventually that triplet rhythm is going to come back in, dun, 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 which is again the first movement rhythm and the third movement rhythm. Okay, and you have these long lyrical lines, and it seems like again like the entire symphony is colliding in and on itself, and it's going to keep getting bigger and keep getting bigger and keep getting better. And what's nice about this harmony is slightly implying that relationship, that minor fourth chord, but it's not quite obvious what's happening. But then it finally builds up to where the entire music just collides on this giant unison fortissimo measure. It's huge. It's like, again, like similar in the Schoenberg, everything has come together in one giant symphonic moment. Dee, ya, ya. And this is where that C flat emerges. That is that C flat that was in the very beginning of the symphony. It lands on it, and it's like, this is the moment it's going to reveal itself. This is what it's all been leading toward, is this one harmony right here. And then again, the entire symphony plays that quarter note rhythm. Dun, 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 dee, dun. And so again, they've brought all the themes together, and they're all playing it at once. And it's a really powerful moment. So let's listen to this entire opening of Bruckner Symphony Number, the finale. This is a really great moment. Here we go. Okay, good. I wanted to get there because you hear the opening of the piece came back. That literally was the opening. That was, it's the emergence. So again, then it goes into these really incredible kind of segmented moments that it's very cool, very cool. So we're almost there. We're very close to getting done. So for the quartet, just read this real quick. It's a really short passage. The quartet, she says. What does she say right here? Is based on the yes. The cohesion of the group of four is less endangered than the band that unites the trio to the group. In the quartet, the network stabilizes. Okay, many people have called the quartet the greatest, the string quartet, the greatest medium ever to write for composition. I'll let you be the judge of that, but there's a lot of reason for why this medium works so well. And so we're going to listen to another piece by Eva-Maria Houben. This was a piece written recently, actually. It's called Nothing More for String Quartet, and it was actually written for Eric Carlson, the violin professor here at UCSD. And we're going to listen to a recording that he did. And so just to look at this piece, one thing I like about this piece, this is similar to Schoenberg. This is a 12-tone composition. And actually, Eric specifically asked her to write a 12-tone composition. She's, before that, she wasn't really a 12-tone composer. And it's... but she decided to go into it, and it's really interesting the way she works with this, because at the beginning you see that it's just these chords. And so everybody is in this group. You hear this unified sound, but at the same time, everybody is responsible for a very specific note in the 12-tone chords. And they hold it, and then it disappears. And then you hold it again, and you disappear. And it goes through 2 iterations of the 12-tone row, which is really, really beautiful. And you just have these chords. And so we're going to listen to 2 movements. The other movement we're going to listen to is the last movement. And this is, what's going on here? You can see the other movements. These are the other ones. I really like this one. This is cool, the way she does it. But the last movement is really beautiful. This is a totally kind of open-ended way where everybody can come in any way they want. And there's any durations, any pauses. And so what she's allowing is she's taking the harmony from the opening, but it's allowing this freedom to the performers. And it's like they are separating now. They are all just going their own ways and allowing the coincidences to occur. And so you now hear this structured sound start to separate it. And it's really beautiful the way Eric and the group play it. And so it's kind of the opposite. It's like they started together and then they dispersed, as opposed to them all trying to come together. So let's listen to this. Let me make sure I have this. Yeah. This is a Nothing More by Eva-Maria Houben. Okay, and we're going to listen to 2 movements, the first and the last. Great. Good. We're getting to the end. We're on our last thing right now, so just stay with me. We're very close to being done. We're at the very end of Bruckner's Symphony Number 4, and this is one of my favorite moments in all of music. I'm going to show you the last 3 or 4 minutes of the piece, and it's this unbelievable coda that he wrote that is just, to me, really moving and spectacular and bizarre, and it's very cool. And so at the end right here, I love it. It goes through this big climax, and then it kind of slowly disappears. It's all these kind of fragments as it just kind of winds down, just outlining the chord. Then finally, you just begin it right here. This coda just kind of starts. Again, this is kind of like what that bass player was like, yeah, things just end and then they just kind of begin. And right here, it just seems to begin. But there's something kind of that you feel that I remember thinking this. I always felt it, but didn't understand it for a while. And to me, this is almost like a return to the beginning of the symphony, but it's kind of colliding in on itself, to where at the beginning, what happened was you had the tremolo that began out of nothing and you just sat there, and then one line emerged. Now they begin at the exact same time. And so you have the tremolo and this line, and it's reversed itself. It's going up now instead of down. And this tremolo, even though it's still a tremolo, it takes on a new life. It seems to have a little bit more agitation to it. There's this da yi yo di do yi yo di do di do di. Again, it's still repeating, it's still similar, but there's something like it's emerging into something new, something that was previously not there. And again, it keeps hinting at this A flat minor chord, this C flat that keeps coming in. But finally, to me, it seems that that A flat chord finally makes itself known. It finally emerges into something, which is this chorale. You hear this brass chorale. Like, again, it returns to this sound of the organ, and it's almost like this abstract instrumental choir just kind of emerges and starts singing these beautiful harmonies. And it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going. You hear this triplet rhythm come back, keeps going, and then finally it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it lands on this last moment of the symphony is really spectacular to me, because what happens is the E flat chord is there. The opening harmony is there. Dee, dom, da, da, and he's holding E flat. And at the exact same time, the violins in the top are screaming this A flat C minor kind of, or sorry, the A flat C flat chord right there, which is really this combination of the harmony that started the piece. And again, I said that C flat was, to me, the whole basis of it. And it's what he does is he just juxtaposes them on top of each other, and he just lets it blare out as loud as possible. And so, in any other symphonies, it resolves itself, and to me, he doesn't. He just lets these harmonies sit on top of each other, and it's really, really unbelievable. So when you get here, listen to this giant E flat, but also listen to what the violins are doing. Listen to the top. It's really it has this tension that is really unbelievable. So let's listen to this. Where is it? We're going to listen to a little bit before this. Just to get into it so I can listen to that last part. But here we go, 3:38. Sorry, what am I doing? There it is. Yeah, here we go. Sorry. Here we are. Great. And that concludes my presentation on Bruckner 4. Thank you all who kind of stuck to the end. And I hope you enjoyed that. I know it's late, but I mean, do we have time for if anyone has any questions? Awesome.